I've always had vivid dreams. For better or worse, they've been intense, like full-length movies with complex characters and rich storylines. Some people say they rarely dream or never remember what they dream about. But for me, it's like stepping into an alternate world every night. I've lived entire lifetimes in my sleep. Sometimes it's fun, other times it's terrifying. One nightmare still haunts me. I woke up screaming after my mother's head turned into an alligator. She chased me around, yelling that she wanted to eat my insides. Now, it sounds absurd, but back then, I couldn't shake the fear. It took me a week before I'd let my mom hug me again. But, for the most part, I loved dreaming. As a writer, my dreams often fuel my stories. While awake, my imagination felt limited like a horse-drawn carriage. But in dreams, my imagination soared, like a starship traveling to places I couldn't reach in real life. That was before everything changed. A year after my father's tragic death in a car accident, my dreams took a dark turn. I was in the car with him when it happened. One minute we were talking and laughing, the next, there was a semi-truck, and then we were upside down. I made it out with just a night in the hospital. My dad didn't. Surprisingly, I adjusted to the loss fairly well, good days, bad days. But my dreams, those were another story. My dad started appearing in them, but not in the way you might expect. He wasn't just a comforting memory. He felt real, and every time I dreamt of him, I knew he was dead. Yet, there he was, alive and right in front of me. It was as if two impossible things could be true at once. One dream stands out. We were in the car, just like before the accident. My first thought was, "Dad, you're dead. You shouldn't be driving." I told him that, but he didn't react. Then he turned to look at me with a blank expression, completely void of emotion. That was the most haunting part because my dad always showed some feeling, whether it was love, pride, or even frustration. But now he looked through me like I wasn't there. He finally spoke, his voice flat and cold. "You shouldn't be here." "What?" "Dad, you shouldn't be here," I replied, choking back emotion. "You need to wake up." Just like that, I jolted awake, my heart racing. I was wide-eyed, scanning my room for whatever had startled me. And then, I heard it, a sharp snipping sound, like a giant pair of scissors cutting through the air, right next to my ear. I turned on the lights, but saw nothing, just an empty room. It was midnight. The next day, I couldn't shake the dream or the noise. At work, I guzzled coffee, but nothing could clear the fog of exhaustion. My coworkers could tell something was off, but they were kind enough not to say anything. That night, I asked my roommate John if he had heard anything strange the night before. He shrugged. "I heard something. Maybe it was a cat?" "What time?" I asked. "Around midnight, I think," he replied. My heart dropped. Later, I dreamt again. This time, it was worse. I was standing in my own living room, but I wasn't really me. It was like I was watching from outside my body. Everything was silent, except for the ticking of a clock. Then, I heard a metallic clinking, like someone struggling with the back door. Slowly, it opened. What walked in was impossible to describe. The creature was human-shaped, but its body was mutilated beyond recognition. Its skin was pale and covered in scars, both fresh and old. It had no hair, no nipples, no belly button, nothing human about it. Its feet were stumps, and it shuffled awkwardly. The worst part? Its hands. It had only a thumb and one finger on each, clutching a pair of massive, rusty shears. With every step, the thing would snap the air with those shears, making a sound that echoed through my skull. Its face. Dear God. Its ears, nose, and eyelids were gone, leaving only gaping holes. And its mouth had been cut into a permanent, twisted grin. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I was frozen as I watched this thing, this grotesque nightmare, creep through my houses, slowly climbing the stairs toward me, snipping its shears all the while. I could only wait for what came next. I found myself floating in my bedroom, staring down at my own body, peacefully asleep in bed. But something was wrong. A creature was slowly creeping up the stairs. And even in my detached state, panic gripped me. I knew it was coming for me. The shears it carried craved my blood. Desperately, I willed myself to wake up, to escape the danger. But I couldn't move. The creature stopped just outside my bedroom door. I screamed in my mind, begging myself to wake up. But all I could do was watch as its hand reached for the door. Slowly, its red tongue flicked out, licking the blades of its shears. Then it gripped the doorknob, trembling with excitement. Suddenly, I was back in my body, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. I pulled the covers up to my chin and pressed myself against the wall, eyes locked on the doorknob. It seemed to move, ever so slightly, but I couldn't be sure. I waited, listening for any sound, the turning of the knob, or worse, the snip of those deadly shears. After an hour, I finally built up the courage to turn on my bedside lamp. Grabbing my phone, I called John, my neighbor. He was annoyed, but when I told him someone was in the house, he came over to check. As you might have guessed, there was no one there, just another vivid nightmare. Embarrassed, I felt foolish, but I couldn't sleep after that. The next day, exhausted, I dragged myself to my girlfriend Brooke's house. We watched a silly movie, and I told her about my dream. Ew, she said, which made me laugh. Yeah, that one really got to me, I admitted. I called it the Midnight Man. I believe you, she replied. That sounds awful. I nodded. It was. We sat in silence for a moment before Brooke shared something that surprised me. Did I ever tell you I used to have night terrors? She asked. It wasn't like a normal nightmare. It felt like something was really there, something coming for me. I thought I was going to die. Her words hit me hard. Do you still dream about your dad? She asked gently. I nodded. Sometimes, I whispered, feeling a lump in my throat. She hugged me, and we spent the rest of the evening in each other's arms. Later, I went home and fell asleep, but something was wrong. This time, it wasn't a sound that woke me, it was a smell. A musky, dirty odor, like an unbathed dog, filled my room. It scratched at my senses, forcing me to open my eyes. The creature was there, standing over me, its wide, slit mouth grinning, eyes bloodshot and unblinking. I screamed louder than ever before, hoping someone would hear me, but deep down, I knew no one would. I tried to move, but pain shot through my wrists. I looked down and saw rusty shears pinning them to the headboard. Agony ripped through me with every slight movement. This can't be real, I thought. It has to be a dream. But the monster was real. It stood over me, hungry and eager, wielding another pair of shears. It glanced at my bloody arms, excited by the sight. Its yellow teeth gleamed as its red tongue flicked out again, savoring the moment. I begged for mercy, but it only grinned wider. Slowly, it leaned in closer and closer, inhaling my scent like it was enjoying the moment. I gagged from the foul smell. Then, without warning, it grabbed my ankle with its cold, bony fingers. I kicked and screamed, but its grip was too strong. With one swift motion, it began cutting. Pain shot through my body as the shears sliced through my flesh. I watched in horror as my foot was severed, and the creature held it up like a trophy. I screamed again, but the room began to fade. The last thing I saw was the monster jamming my foot into its mouth, chewing it up, bones and all. As everything went dark, all I could hear was the sickening crunch of its teeth. As darkness swallowed me, I suddenly jolted awake, gasping for air, heart racing as if it were trying to escape my chest. My arms flailed wildly as if I was drowning. In my panic, I barely noticed the two nurses who rushed in, grabbing me by the wrists and shoulders, pinning me down. They murmured something, their voices low and soothing, but I couldn't hear them over the pounding in my ears. I felt the tug of an four in my arm, and my body froze at the sensation. Confusion clouded my thoughts. Where was I? Why was I here? The sterile white walls around me blurred as I tried to get a grip on my surroundings. Slowly, too slowly, I realized I was in a hospital bed. My limbs were trembling, and I had to fight against the overwhelming urge to tear at the tubes and wires attached to me. The nurses spoke softly, their voices a calming hum in the back of my mind. It took a full 5 minutes for the fog to lift enough for me to understand. I was in a hospital. Another 10 minutes passed before my breathing steadied, but my heart still hammered like a drum when the doctor entered the room. Her presence was calm but authoritative. She wore the kind of expression you'd expect from someone who had seen too much and still tried to act as if nothing fazed her. "Do you remember what happened?" she asked gently after the briefest exchange of pleasantries. Her eyes were probing, like she already knew the answer, but wanted to hear it from me. I told her what I could remember. The memory felt disjointed and strange, like trying to hold on to a dream after waking. Her expression barely shifted, but I could sense her disbelief. "How did I get here?" I demanded, my voice hoarse. "Who found me? And is that thing still in the house?" My words sounded foreign to me, surreal and frantic. The doctor's face remained calm, but there was a flicker of concern. She stepped forward and took my arm, checking the 4 and then inspecting the bandages on my wrists, her touch gentle but firm. "I'm afraid you're a bit delusional," she said, her voice cool and professional. "That's nothing to be alarmed about. You were dehydrated, and we have you on pain medication. It's very common to feel confused in situations like this. Are you sure you don't remember what really happened?" My heart skipped. "Yes," I whispered fiercely, though it felt more like a feeble breath. "I told you, a monster." "There was no monster," the doctor said flatly, as if she had heard this 100 times before. "You don't remember the accident?" "Accident?" The word felt wrong in my mouth. She sighed softly, like she was trying to explain something to a child. "You were in a collision with a truck. It knocked you off the road, and your car rolled several times. You were extremely lucky to survive. You've been unconscious for 3 days." 3 days. 3 days? I could barely comprehend it. I didn't remember driving or even leaving the house. It didn't make sense. But the explanation, the idea of an accident, was still easier to accept than that thing I had seen. A creature, its twisted smile and razor-sharp scissors. But it was impossible, wasn't it? The doctor's eyes followed my gaze down to my feet. There was something in her expression that made my stomach drop. She looked like she was bracing herself for something she had to say but didn't want to. "We had to make a difficult decision to keep you alive," she said quietly, her voice suddenly distant, almost like an echo. I hesitated before slowly pulling the hospital sheet up, as if delaying the inevitable would somehow make it less real. My left foot was bare, resting on the mattress as it should. But then I saw the other no, the absence of the other. White bandages wrapped around the stump of my right leg, just below the knee. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room, and all I could do was stare at the place where my foot should have been. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, none of them coherent, none of them making sense. I knew I should be feeling something: anger, sorrow, disbelief, but all I felt was numb. Before I could even process it, the door swung open, and my mother and sister rushed into the room. Their faces were wet with tears, and the moment they saw me, they broke down completely. My mother's sobs filled the room, and my sister's grip on my hand was tight, almost painfully so. For several long minutes, we simply held each other, surrounded by the weight of everything that had happened or hadn't happened, depending on who you asked. "Thank God you're okay," my mom cried between sobs. "I didn't think you were ever going to wake up." "I'm okay," I murmured, my voice weak. Even in that moment, I felt like I had to be the strong one, the one who reassured them. This sucks, but I'll get through it. We'll get through it." More tears followed, more embraces. But I noticed something strange: my sister. She was quiet, almost unnaturally so, her red-rimmed eyes darting away from me every time I tried to make eye contact. She had always been the emotional one, so why wasn't she crying more? Why wasn't she reacting the way I expected? It took me a few minutes to gather the courage to break the silence. "The thing is," I said slowly, the words feeling heavier than they should, "I don't even remember driving." That was when my mother's sobbing turned into something much worse. She collapsed into my sister's arms, wailing uncontrollably, her grief suddenly deeper, sharper. It was like something inside her had finally snapped. Confused, I turned to my sister. "Why did that set her off?" I asked, my heart pounding again. "What's going on?" My sister's face was pale, her eyes hollow as she gripped my hand tighter. She looked like she was about to speak, but the words seemed caught in her throat. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she whispered, "You weren't driving." I blinked, trying to make sense of what she had just said. Then, who was? She still couldn't look at me. Her voice broke when she finally answered, "Dad." For a moment, the world around me stopped. "What?" "No," I stammered, my chest tightening. "Dad's dead." And then, like a dam breaking, my mother's sobs grew even louder. My sister was shaking, tears streaming down her face as she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Fear? Grief? Guilt? "What do you mean, you know?" my sister asked, her voice trembling. "I know," I insisted. "Dad died last year." "I'm not delusional, no matter what the doctors say. I know what happened." "No, no, no," my sister muttered, shaking her head violently. "Dad didn't die last year. He died last night." Last night? My heart skipped a beat. Everything inside me felt like it was shattering. How? How could this be? Could I have imagined the entire year? A whole year of my life gone, wiped from existence as if it had never happened. But it didn't feel like a dream. I had mourned him. I had cried and grieved. I had been through the motions of loss. How could I relive it now, as if none of it had been real the first time? The days following that revelation blurred together, each one feeling more unreal than the last. It was as though I was drifting through a fog, unable to trust my own memories. Bit by bit, I realized that things I thought were true, things I had taken for granted, weren't real at all. The promotion I had celebrated, it had never happened. The story I thought I'd published, just a figment of my imagination. But worst of all, the girlfriend I had loved, the one whose memory still lingered in my mind, wasn't real either. She had never existed. That hurt more than losing my foot. My memories of her were still vivid, still so clear. But with every passing day, they began to fade like the remnants of a dream you can't quite hold on to. Yet, through it all, there was one memory that never faded. The creature, the Midnight Man. His wide, twisted smile, the glint of his scissors, the way my foot had disappeared down his bloody throat. That image was burned into my mind, a scar that would never heal. Even now, I'm not sure what really happened to me. I think about it every day, turning it over and over in my mind. Was it all a dream? A tragic coincidence that I predicted my father's death? Or was it something more, some sort of premonition, a glimpse of the future that I never should have had? Or maybe the creature was real. Maybe it had created that missing year, prolonging my grief, feeding on my fear, until it devoured a piece of me. I often wonder if the scars on its body tell the stories of its other victims. How many people has it done this to? How long has it been tormenting people like me? Even though I haven't dreamt of the creature again, its image is always there, lurking in the corners of my mind. I can't sleep before midnight anymore. The thought of falling asleep too early fills me with dread, as if doing so might bring the Midnight Man back into my dreams. But the worst part is, I can't tell anyone. Nightmares always sound ridiculous when you try to explain them. No one would take me seriously. They'd all think I was just confused, just traumatized by the accident. They wouldn't believe me. But last night, I dreamt of my father. We were driving down a sunny country road, just the two of us, like we used to. But when I looked at him, his eyes were hollow, lifeless, like he was already dead. He turned to me, and with a voice that echoed in the empty car, he said, "You have to wake up.